I'm going to give you guys a very, very condensed crash course in the history of animation. Animation's been around for a very, very, very long time. It's something I'm super familiar with. And one of the earliest tools of animation that was readily available to the public was a phenakistoscope. And it's basically a really awesome pinwheel with pictures on it. What you did was you pointed the image portion of it towards a mirror, and you look through the back, and they have slits on it right here. You look through the slits, and as you did that, it looked like whatever image was printed on the front of it was in motion. And there were several other sort of novelty items like that that were around during the 19th century, such as a thermotrope and a zoetrope. Now, zoetropes are really cool. You may have seen these before. They're in museums and things like that. It's a cylinder, and it's the same idea, except for the images are printed around the interior of the cylinder, and you looked in through the outside. And they still make zoetropes today. If you happen to go to California Adventure, or yeah, they have a three-dimensional zoetrope there, which is really, really cool. Lightning sketches were pretty much the beginning of animation in the film era. Now, at the turn of the century, we didn't have movies, we had vaudeville, and that was how everyone got their entertainment, and that's how all of our celebrities were born. They were born through vaudeville. You know, W.C. Fields and even Charlie Chaplin had his beginnings in vaudeville. And so these lightning sketch artists were the first people to actually put animation into films. They would start off by, well, let's say J. Stuart Blackton. He would create a sketch and then take a picture, and create a sketch and then take a picture, and eventually play all these photographs back on film. And people actually gasped when they saw this. They had never seen anything like this before. It was a living, moving, breathing drawing in reality that was being drawn by itself, and it was something very impressive to these people. Winsor McCay was another one of these pioneers, and he actually started off using cell animation, which is what we not necessarily see today. It's sort of on its way out, but what the main form of animation was for several years. And I'll use this book as kind of a demonstration on how cell animation works. So this is a cell. It's a clear piece of plastic, and your character or object or whatever is drawn on that, or painted on that, and it's put onto a background. And so what happens is you have film that moves at 24 frames per second. And having film that moves at 24 frames per second, if you're drawing anything close to 24 drawings per second, that's over 1 million drawings for a simple hour-and-a-half film. That's a lot of images. And so what you need to do is you have something drawn in this position, and then you make all these drawings, and it ends up in this position. You take a picture each time, and that's how the film gets created. And so some of these studios that were working around the turn of the century were the Fleischer Studios, and you can see some of the characters they created there. And the Walt Disney Studio was always at the forefront of innovation. Now, Walt Disney and his partner Ub Iwerks actually created Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse. He was this cartoon was the first cartoon to actually successfully use synchronized sound, and they further went on to innovate the Xerox process. So every time you Xerox something, just keep in mind that it was created for animation purposes first, and use the first film completely rendered in Technicolor as an animated film, which was Flowers and Trees in 1932. The Warner Brothers Animation Studio brought America laughter. I am a firm believer in that. I'm good friends with an animation expert, the former, he actually wrote this book, Jerry Beck. He's at the forefront of Warner Brothers history, and he kind of, he told me one day, he said, every generation learns to laugh from Warner Brothers because it has such a, shelf life. Everybody knows who these characters are. And so they've been very, very influential. Other studios include the Walter Lantz Studio and the MGM Studios. Now, the process of animation is as simple as it is complex. You have the story portion of it. You have to have a good story first, a good solid story. After that, it goes into storyboarding to make sure that you have all your scenes worked out. Next, you have to send it to the voiceover artist so that the animators know what they're actually animating to. And then they have to actually animate the entire picture. They have to draw all the sketches, they have to do all the in-betweening, and then while all that's happening, the sound artists are coming in, the Foley artists that make all the noise, and the composers who are actually making the score for the film are hard at work. After all that's done, they send it to the ink and paint department to get it inked and colored, and then while that's going on, the background artists are hard at work. Once all that's done, they slap them all together, send it to film, and then you have your finished product. Now, there are other types of animation than just cell animation or CG animation now. Yeah, stop motion animation, we're pretty familiar with it from films like Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's been around for a very, very, very long time. And it's, yeah, even South Park started off as stop motion animation, even though it's made its way towards computer-generated animation now. Live action has always been a part of animation. In fact, animation was originally intended to be used in live action films, stop motion animation and things like that. So the combination of those two has been around for a very, very, very long time. Now, there is a big difference between full animation and what I'll talk about later, limited animation. Full animation is what people think of when they think of the Walt Disney Studios or the Warner Brothers Studios. Now, these are meticulous drawings. The sheer amount of drawings that are in a full animated feature film outweigh a limited animation film by probably 5 times. And it would pretty much mean that instead of going from here to here, you have all the positions drawn in between there. So there's a sense of fluidity that goes along with full animation that it kind of brings the magic and the realism that comes along with the Disney Studios. Limited animation, it came along as sort of a necessity and a stylistic choice. Now, animation studios started to lose money because these cartoons were never intended for children. Okay, cartoons were never intended for children. What they were part of was the film package. When you went to go see a movie back in the day, you got the news, you got a comedy short, you had your feature film, and you got a cartoon. It was like Christmas every time you went to the movies. And people stopped doing that. They stopped packaging films like that. And with the advent of television, they had to start pumping these films out really quickly. So limited animation came about when they decided that why animate an entire character when you could have the character stand still and just animate the arm. So that's why you see like a lot of cells nowadays with like just like a leg drawn on it. Even though it looks super silly, it was part of how these films were created. In addition to that, studios such as the UPA studios actually did this as a stylistic choice. These characters were made with a very simple, fluid shapes that could easily be animated, and it ended up being a very, like I said, stylistic decision that was at the forefront of animation and popular art at the time of the early 1950s. And if you read a book called Cartoon Modern by Amit Amidi, I met Amit at a conference one time, and he was telling me that the magic that is involved in limited animation is something that could never be accomplished through full animation because you have to use your imagination to kind of decide what's going on. You have to be able to be a little bit more of an intelligent person to really understand the artistic value of a limited animation film. There's also rotoscoping, which is really popular now, all done with computers, but a long time ago, rotoscoping was done by photographing images of an actual person and then tracing on top of it the character that you wanted. It gave a really realistic motion to these characters, but at the same time, it could not take you out of reality the way that something that would be animated traditionally could. Now, computer-generated animation is something that is widely used today. And the first film that was actually using computer animation as an aid was The Great Mouse Detective, and that was back in 1986. The entire Big Ben clock scene was rendered as a three-dimensional image and then traced over later by the ink and paint department at the Walt Disney Studios. Beauty and the Beast was the first film to have an entirely CG scene in it, which was the ballroom scene. Tron was at the forefront of animation, and Reboot was the first television show ever to be completely rendered by a computer. Pixar and DreamWorks is what we're familiar with now, and Pixar's first film was The Adventures of Andre and Wally B, and they originally started off as a high-end computer company, and then later on was purchased by the Disney company for their ability to make feature films such as Toy Story, which was the first feature film ever to be completely animated by a computer. Now, the future of animation is all around us. Now, people don't think about this, but about 60% of each movie that we watch, depending on what kind of movie it is, if it's a big action thriller like these, about 60% of the movie is all animation. It's not live action. So if you think about it, and you think about Saturday morning cartoons, and you think about this, it's the same thing. It's animation, whether it's done with a cell or if it's done with a computer. So it's something really, really cool to think about. And when other people say, oh, I play video games, I think of video games and I think of animation. I don't think of just sitting in front of a screen playing a game. You're actually interacting with drawings. You're actually interacting with something that has been created by an artist, which people don't ever think about when they think about video games. They just think about, oh, it's interesting, it's cool, it's a video game. So the future of animation is set in stone. It's going to be around for a very, very long time because now as a nation and as a planet, we're used to seeing animation replace live action. And eventually, most of these films will be completely computer-generated animation and there will be no need for actors. So that's my theory on the future of animation.